Hey, welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and we are going to do this again. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company, managing partner of Saywitz Properties. It's Tuesday morning. We are talking real estate. We had some technical difficulties. For those of you who are listening live out there that are bearing with us, we're doing this basically a second time. For those of you who are watching it after and it's been recorded and it's online or wherever you're seeing it, then don't worry about anything I'm saying. We're just going to move on and pretend like it never happened. So with all of that said, I'm excited about today's show. We are going to talk some tax strategies. We are going to talk short-term rentals. We're going to talk how the concept of short-term rentals sort of came about, where it is in today's environment, and then what some of the do's and don'ts and how you navigate that. And so with us today, I'm excited to have our guest, Pamela Knudsen, with AVALARA, who is a software and management company, I guess is the best way I can describe it, who has developed a tax strategy and a software platform for the short-term lodging rental industry. Pamela, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us on the technical side of things. We're going to go again, and hopefully nobody knows the difference. And so I appreciate you coming on, and I am, as I mentioned to you before, familiar with the short-term rental market. And for those folks out there that are not familiar with it, it really has boomed, especially with COVID. And with the cost of hotels and just the fact that people don't really want to stay in hotels as much anymore. I think that's just a function of people's preferences and how they like to travel. And so with all of that comes a whole new dynamic and business model if you're a property owner in terms of creating income from renting out your property. I mean, Pamela, is that sort of a fair assessment of where things are at with it?
Yep, it definitely, the pandemic did see the market boom because it gave people the option to stay someplace without having shared areas like elevators or lobbies or anything like that. So it really allowed people to kind of be more flexible and gave them an ability to work while they were someplace else as well. So they could combine a couple of different things.
Yeah, and you could keep, I mean, if you did have your family with you, you could keep your whole family in one place, not being cooped up in a tiny room. And you still had the luxuries of cooking and having a patio, like you say, and being able to move around and have that more home-like feel and escape wherever it is that you were trying to escape. And so with all of that, I guess what I've seen as a property owner, and we have short-term rental properties ourselves, is that the demand for the short-term rental market has gone up significantly, but at the same time, so has the inventory in many areas, because a lot of people have gotten on board with the bandwagon of trying to rent out their property and make additional income.
Yeah, absolutely. People have really started to look at this as saying, how can we create that kind of secondary stream of income, whether whether for just little pieces of time or a little bit broader, that allows them to afford that second house in another location that they really love to visit. So it's really been kind of a combination of both.
Yeah, and I guess I'll talk about the concept of it first, and then certainly we can dovetail into AVALARA and what you guys do. But the concept of the short-term rental is not necessarily approved by all cities for all people. So just because you own a property and you decide you want to rent it out, in some cities, there are very strict regulations from a tax standpoint, from a certification standpoint, from a permitting standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, and then others are either lax or non-existent. But those cities that have high amounts of vacation traffic and travelers have gotten smart and have basically regulated this because it's a huge profit center for them to be able to generate revenue. And they also want to be able to monitor to some degree and be able to keep track of who's coming in and out of their city.
Exactly. And that's one of the trends that we're seeing across the nation, is that there are more and more regulations coming in place. And to your point, some of those regulations are pretty simple, saying, hey, just register with us, we're good to go. Others are a lot more complex, where it's like, in order to register, you have to get a home inspection, and you have to make sure your home is up to code before you can actually get a permit to rent it out. So it really varies from city to city. It's not even on a state level. It's very localized what those regulations are. And that's one of the complexities of the market in and of itself, is you have to understand what those regulations are and how to best meet them so that you can do this in a compliant manner.
Yeah, and I mean, in addition to the, I guess, the permitting aspect of it, you have taxes that you have to pay to the city. You have your own income that you have to track, and then you have in cities that are very sophisticated, you have minimum nights, you have random inspections, you have maximum amount of people, maximum amount of parking, and all kinds of other things that cities that are very sophisticated, like in Newport Beach here in Southern California, have done and have really have a whole department then to monitor it. And then you have other cities that have just recently come into it. And a good example of that would be a La Quinta or a Palm Desert that are now starting to get on board with trying to figure out how to regulate it. And then you have other areas that, all you got to do is make a phone call, or you could still do what you want. But the idea that you can just wake up one day, decide to rent out your home or your condo or your apartment or whatever you have, and just throw it on Airbnb or Vrbo or Craigslist or any other platform that you want to, you really can't do that, nor do I think you'd really want to, for many reasons. And so that brings up then the monitoring from the property owner's perspective of how do I go about, if I am going to rent it out and it's not just a one-time shot, how do I manage my basically side business or whatever I have going on? And I think that's where your company comes in, correct?
Yes, we help everything from, once somebody decides that this is what they want to do, we'll help them from the permitting and registration process. So helping them get their short-term rental permit, register to collect and remit taxes, all the way through to the tax collection and remittance to the jurisdiction. So it's an ongoing process. We help you get set up, and then we'll help you continue to stay in compliance from a taxing standpoint. And, and again, those regulations change frequently. So, if you've got a permit, but something changes in the regulation, when you go to renew, you may have to take an additional step because they've changed the regulations in some way, shape, or form. And we'll help keep on top of that and help you with that. And then again, from the tax collection standpoint, you have to know who you've got to pay, when you've got to pay, how often. Some jurisdictions you have to send them something monthly, some are quarterly, some are annually. And so just because you have a property, you may be paying to 3 different taxing jurisdictions, and each one of them may have different timing and different responsibilities around that. And so that's where we come into play, is to help manage that process.
And just for those who are not super sophisticated with the short-term rental process, the fact of the matter is the city or whatever jurisdiction is overseeing your particular property, wherever you own it, they take a cut. I mean, nothing's free,
Yes.
right? So
You're right.
it's a percentage of whatever you bring in, and each place is a different sort of model on how that goes. And if you don't pay, they can come after you, or they could take away your permit, or forbid you, or preclude you from being able to rent it in the future. And so for some property owners, it's certainly a second income. For others, in addition to the income, it adds value to the property itself because you're creating more potential income. So if you do go to sell the property, and you do have a steady stream of additional income, on top of the ability for you to stay there, or if it's just investment property, it adds a whole new dimension to the value of the property, I guess I would say.
Yeah, it does, especially for places where, it's one of the kind of more normal things is to have these rental properties. It really does. It allows people to say, hey, yes, this may be slightly over a budget, but because of this income you're going to get, you might be able to afford something slightly different than what you thought because you've got this income that's coming in as part of the property. And it is becoming really a critical factor to make sure that you are in compliance because, to your point, most of the cities, most of the communities are really starting to crack down on that compliance because it's a revenue stream for them. And it's a revenue stream that helps pay for services like road maintenance or, the various law enforcement agencies, et cetera. So it is a revenue stream that they really depend on. And they're starting to realize that there is a large swath potentially of these short-term rentals that are not compliant. and that there's a revenue stream that's missing that's coming into them. So they are starting to crack down using a lot of different methods to figure out who's not in compliance.
Yeah, and I forget the number, but in Newport Beach, we had the mayor on here a number of months ago. I want to say the figure they threw out was something to the tune of $12 million a year, but it might even be more than that. And then I know in Newport Beach they charge you an annual. They used to be free to have the permit itself. You just had to fill out the paperwork, and now I think it's a couple $100 a year. So when you start talking about that times 1,000 units or more, depending upon where you are in a city, it really is millions of dollars. And so it applies to really anywhere. I mean, for folks who've traveled, who've stayed in an Airbnb, or have looked online for staying at someplace, whether that's in a ski town or whether that's in Hawaii on vacation, or certainly here in Southern California, anywhere where there's a destination and people rent their places out, then not only is the platform of wherever you've seen it and having it advertised getting a fee, the city's getting a fee, the owner gets a fee, the management company, the cleaning company. I mean, this is a multi-layered business where there are multiple industries that are benefiting from it.
Exactly. It's the retailers that come in, or the tourists, when they come in, they're going to the local shops, they're going to the local restaurants, the local grocery stores. But again, it's that local landscaper that somebody's hired to come make sure that the lawn is mowed and the weeds are taken care of. It's the local cleaning service that comes in between guests and cleans the house. It's also the local the local
handyman,
construction
right?
organization, the handyman that coming in and making adjustments or upgrades or fixes, all that. So there's really a whole economic system around these short-term rentals that is benefiting the community.
And so let's talk about your company, Avalara, for a second. So if I recall my homework that I did correctly, the company was founded in or about 2004, so it's been around for about 20 years now. And certainly must have evolved as time has gone on with the industry itself. I guess talk about the company and then the software platform and how it works for property owners out there.
Yep. So Avalara as a whole, we handle transactional tax across the board. So in addition to lodging tax, like what we're talking about here, we handle sales and use tax and telecommunications tax. So anything where you pay a tax when you buy a service or an item, that's what we handle. And again, we're about 20 years old. We started about 20 years ago. We moved into the short-term rental space really about 12 years ago, and started working with that short-term rental space and doing that. And so really what it is if somebody wants to start a short-term rental, they contact us. We will help them get permitted. We'll help them make sure that they meet all the requirements for the licensing and registration. And then they simply report to us on a monthly basis the revenue that they had for that month. And then we calculate what portion of that was tax. We'll complete the tax returns. We'll send those tax returns to the various taxing jurisdictions, because again, it may be city, there may be a city, a county, and a state one that all have to be filed, and all those monies have to be remitted. And then we'll pull the funds from the property owner's account to remit them to the taxing authorities so that the returns are filed on time and for the correct amount.
And when you're talking about tax returns, again, just for clarification purposes, as a property owner, I file my own taxes. I have my CPA that would do my personal income taxes. But really what you're talking about is there are a separate set of taxes that are due specifically from the income that's generated from the property, correct?
Correct. Yeah, this is not your income tax. This is, someplace, the easiest way for a lot of people to understand is when you stay at a hotel and you have a rate that's $129 a night, for example, when you check out and you see your bill, you've got $129 and then you've got, 30 some odd dollars of various taxes on that bill. The short-term rental industry is very similar. The difference is that a lot of times the nightly fee or the nightly rate that people say it's $250 a night.
It's not.
They do that as an all-inclusive fee, hey, this is what we're going to charge you. But what has to come out of that $250 are all those taxes that are required to be paid. So people can do it one of two ways. They can either say this is the total nightly fee, and then you pull the taxes out of that nightly fee, or you say here's the nightly fee, and then all the taxes are added onto it. But either way, you need to understand what those tax rates are. And those tax rates change frequently, and the frequency by which you have to file them can be different for every single type of tax you have to file. It could be that you have to do it monthly in one place, quarterly in another, or annually on another. So
Yeah.
it varies, and that's why it's so complex. Is because you're not just dealing with one given taxing authority. You're dealing with multiple ones and multiple requirements.
So I'm going to ask a sort of stupid question, but if I'm renting my place out and I'm an individual property owner, then the services that you guys provide seems to make perfect sense because it's an all-encompassing one-stop shopping for me to go to get some financial assistance, and then I can just focus on renting the place out, and you can worry about the rest of the mechanics of it. In some instances, and in many cities, there are property management companies that handle the management, handle the advertising, handle the leasing, and then as the property owner, I just step away and wait for my checks. But that also, I think, works both ways in that in some instances, the property management company may help with that. And in other instances, they may throw it back in your lap and you still have to deal with it.
Yeah, and we have a lot of property managers that work with us as well, because the tax piece is not where that's not where their level of expertise is. Their level of expertise is around just what you said, the marketing, the management, the making sure it gets cleaned, all of that. The tax implications are just complicated, and they're like, we're going to outsource that to somebody where the expertise actually sits, so that they don't have to try and figure it out. And especially if they have properties in multiple locations,
Right.
because
Because you're
again,
dealing with
every
different
single
cities,
one is
right?
different.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And in some cities, there can even be differences based on the size of a property or the number of bedrooms. Like it is so varied that it's really difficult to kind of keep on top of that across the entire country.
Yeah. No, there's no question. And then from I guess, the lessee standpoint, yeah, again, the same concept applies not so much on the tax side, but if you've ever gone again on one of these platforms to try and rent a place, people market them sometimes as $250 a night and that's it. Or when you go to check out and you actually go to book it, it's $250 a night plus a management fee, plus a servicing fee, plus a housekeeping fee, plus a city tax fee, and then all of a sudden your
Right.
250 became 350.
Exactly. And again, that's an option, that's how any given property owner wants to run with this and say, it's easier for me to just say it's an all-inclusive, or it's easier, or I'm just going to say, here's my fee and I want everything else on top of that. So I know exactly what is kind of my revenue stream that is true revenue.
And the platform that you guys have when you set somebody up on it, do I, as the property owner, then have the ability to log into my account and see what you're doing, or is it really
Yep.
more of a service and then you provide me with a summary?
Yep. You can log in and you can see your tax history and you can see that what's been reported, all of those types of things. We have a portal that you can log into and see the information on your account.
And you guys do it across the country?
Yes, we do it across the country.
So it doesn't matter where your property is. And like you say, if I had properties in different states, it'd be very complicated and you guys can help it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we have a lot of property owners who have like one or two properties in Florida and one or two properties in, you know, South Carolina, for example. And so again, they're very different. And even in Florida, they may have something in Orlando and they may have something in Tampa. And those themselves are also going to be different because Orlando's got different regulations than Tampa does.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, in terms of the ongoing operations of what happens if I change property management companies, it really doesn't affect what you guys are doing on your end. It's the same thing. It's just different information's coming from another place, another source.
Correct. Correct.
And then as far as the property management companies themselves go, certainly would be a good resource for them to be include you in their package of services. But I guess the other question I would ask is how does the city view it? I mean, it seems like they would be receptive to having your services in place because they're trying to protect the money that they're supposed to get.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time working with a lot of cities. We have really good relationships with the cities that we deal with, and everything else. And again, all of these jurisdictions, cities specifically, are really looking to say, how do we find the non-compliant individuals? And they're using some really interesting methods to do that these days. Historically, it's been, hey, the neighbor says, hey, I think somebody's using this house as a short-term rental. But now they're looking at, some have audited state records for short-term rentals who have registered with the state but not registered with their local community. So they're finding those discrepancies there. others have also implemented other software, not ours, but other software that does what we call data mining, where it takes a look at the listings on, for
Yes,
example, Airbnb and
of
Vrbo
course.
and their registrations and finds the gaps. And then they can go after those people who are listing on Airbnb but not registered to say, hey, you're not compliant, you need to register. And that can be very, very costly because not only do you have to do the registration fee, which you'd have to do anyway, but they can go backwards in time and say, look, you've been doing this for 2 years. You owe us the taxes
Right.
for all of these rentals that you've done in the past where you weren't compliant. So,
Or interest and
understanding that.
penalties as well if they're really sticklers about it.
That's correct. Yes. A lot of them will do penalties and interest as well. So it can be, and that's a straight out of pocket expense because you can't go back to all of those guests and say, oh, now I need an additional $30 because I should have charged you this 18 months ago.
No, you just
And
you're out
so,
the money, right? If you didn't know what
yeah,
you were
you're
doing.
out the money. So being in compliance is a critical factor to making sure you do this well. And in some cases, even if they only do this, depending again on the jurisdiction, if you only rent your house out 1 week out of the year, you may still be required to be registered and do this. It really is very dependent upon the rules within that taxing jurisdiction.
Well, in some city, again, I keep using Newport Beach as an example. If you don't rent it out, they'll threaten to take away your permit because they have a finite amount of permits and they have a 10-year plus waiting list of people trying to
Right.
get these permits. So the city doesn't want people to have permits for properties they're not maximizing. They like the people renting them out all day long. As
Yep.
long as they're compliant, because it's more revenue. It's no different than a hotel that's doing well generates more hotel tax versus one that's empty and run down. They would want it fixed up so that they can get the tax from it.
Exactly. Yep. So there's a lot of incentive for the communities, for the taxing jurisdictions to really kind of make sure people are in compliance, are renting out their property, and are remitting all of that revenue.
And so, I guess in terms of the industry as a whole, you've been with Avalara for quite some time now, so you've seen the short-term rental industry really sort of, I guess, boom is probably the best way that I could describe it because it really is just a change in how people stay and the amenities that they're looking for. Where do you see the industry going moving forward with this continued regulation? Does that then suppress the desire and the volume, or is it really just a function of, hey, more people are deciding to stay in these kinds of places as opposed to just staying in a hotel?
I think it's really going to depend. And this is where short-term rental owners really need it. This is where being compliant provides another opportunity for them to have a voice. You can't have a voice in what's happening in a community about a short-term rental, about your own short-term rental if you're not actually registered. You can't go and say, well, I have one, and then you're not registered. So you registering and making sure you're compliant gives you a voice. But this is where having a voice into those decisions is really critical because we're seeing regulations run the pendulum from very few to very excessive regulations. I can look at some communities on the East Coast where it's like you can only rent it out if you're staying there while it's rented out. Like, so you have to be there when the guests are there. So you can't ever rent out the whole thing because you have to be there. And that there's all kinds of rules and regulations about that. So we're seeing this wide gamut. But the way you help with that is you have a voice. You get together, you speak to the community, you speak to the leaders, you make sure you're a good neighbor while you're there. Or your renters are good neighbors, so you make sure you have the information and the monitoring in place to ensure that. But that's a critical factor, is to really be involved in what these regulations are driving, because sometimes the only people that are really talking are the people who don't necessarily want a short-term rental in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so you have to be there to have a voice in terms of explaining what the benefit is of the short-term rental.
Well, there's no question. Look, if I live in a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, and then every weekend or every week I've got a different group of people in there who don't really have the same respect for the property, and that's not everybody, but some people are coming for the weekend warrior, some people are coming for a concert or an event, and then they're out of there, right? And then I, as the neighbor, get to deal with that. And in many instances, the houses may be close together, and you're on top of somebody that you don't know who they are, as opposed to just your regular neighbor where you'd say hello every morning, and you could have coffee with them if you wanted. And so there's that aspect of it, but then the flip side of it is you really look at, from an investor standpoint, from a property value standpoint, the short-term rental adds value to the property. At the end of the day, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yep. And so again, that's where people need to really be part of the conversation so that they can help everybody understand kind of what's happening and how this impacts and how this plays out.
And do you see some, like I'm familiar with some cities, especially like out in the Coachella Valley, that have basically said we don't want the short-term rentals. They can go stay in a different city and they can go do their thing. We only will allow 31 days or more, basically eliminating the weekend renter, eliminating the 4-day, the 5-day, the 7-day, even the 10-day renter, and forcing a longer term rental so that you don't have this constant turnover. And then if you do decide to rent it, the city may still get its tax, it may not. But they don't have all of the other complications of the monitoring and the complaints that go with it. Do you find that some cities are gravitating towards that, or are they really, assuming they can get their arms around the short-term rental and they can monitor it, they're fine with it?
I think I haven't seen too many cities really going towards that. I hear it talked about, but I haven't seen them actually going there because, again, I think short-term rental owners are starting to have a better voice in some of this and helping communities to understand the impact. Because when you go down that path and you limit the tourists coming into a given community, you limit all of that revenue that's coming into the other businesses, plus, again, those businesses that might help manage that short-term rental. And so all of that revenue has to be made up by somebody. Like the streets still need to be maintained, the police department still needs to be funded. And so then the burden of that expense goes onto those long-term residents, whether it's in the way of increased property taxes or increased sales tax, any other ways, or services that you now have to pay for. So that's the part that sometimes people miss in this, is that revenue stream that comes from that taxes is a critical part of the budget. And so if it's gone, that budget's got to be made up some way. And that typically then impacts the long-term residents in a way that they didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, yeah, and there's no way to know until you're hit with it, whether that's the trash or extra fees or sewage or anything else that comes through the pipe. And so I guess we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of the economy and then how that relates to people's desire to want to rent out their places. I mean, everything costs more these days. We have inflation, and hotel rooms are that much more expensive. So it's a logical thing for somebody, even if they only rent it out casually, to be able to want to take advantage of the additional income. And I'm just curious your thoughts on where things go in general over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll continue to see the short-term rental, again, the volume of short-term rentals really increased during the pandemic. It started to level out a little bit now because, everything is becoming a little bit more back to a normalized function, and you're seeing more business travelers and everything else coming in. So I think it's gotten a little bit more stable. I think it will stay there for a little bit of time, but I also think as you look at as you look at some of the other things that are happening, people may start to look at it and say, hey, I'm going to go on vacation. I want to go on a 2-week vacation. I can actually partially fund that vacation by renting out my house for the 2 weeks I'm gone.
Yeah.
Those types of things. So I think people are continuing to look at different ways that they can help bring additional revenue into their household. And this will continue to be a piece that's there. I think the challenge is going to be that, people need to understand what it actually takes to do that.
Yeah, and I think also in communities where you are one of only a handful of people that are doing it, your property is that much more desirable for somebody who wants to stay there. And in other cities, what we've seen, as much as there was a run-up during COVID, in other cities where there is mass amounts of short-term rentals, then you'd still have the element of competition where somebody is willing to accept less just to get it filled, and then you now see a flattening off of the prices.
Yes, yep, and that's part of what we're seeing in the trends right now.
Which makes it more difficult for somebody that is a bigger company with a property management company because, again, all your expenses go up, even, just Wi-Fi and cable TV and utilities and trash as a property owner running a property. Your costs are going up, and yet maybe what you were able to get before is not the same, but it's still extra money, and it's all to the bottom line.
Exactly. It's still extra money to the bottom line. It still helps pay for, for you to have that second house somewhere. And in some cases, that's a house that especially if you look at ski areas, you may want to go skiing for February of every year. This is what allows you to afford that house, that allows you to go stay there.
Yeah, and if you enjoy it, then I have a place in the desert, and the people that stayed there liked it so much that the day they checked out, they said, we want to pre-book it for next year and lock it in. And so as the property owner, then you don't have to go looking for more business as you sort of build a following, if you will, and then it becomes easier as time goes on. So we are out of time. Paul's waving at me like he's got a place to be. But if people want to find out more information about AVALARA and about your products and services and process and all of that, how can they find you? What's the website?
The best way is the website, which is avalara.com. So it's AVALARA.com.
Got it. And so for anybody out there that's thinking about renting out their house, for anybody out there that's thinking about going on a trip, or for anybody else out there that would like to get educated on the short-term rental industry and the tax implications and the process that go along with it, do yourself a favor, check out the website. Pamela, I appreciate you being on the show with us today and sharing your insights and talking about your company, and wish you much continued success going forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, so for everybody else out there, I am Barry Saywitz again. It is Tuesday. We will see you back here next week. We will figure out something else cool and exciting to talk about between now and then. So tune in again next week. For everybody here at the radio station, myself, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Let's Talk Real Estate.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.